Okay, I don't know if this is going to be a new video or what, but I've reorganized my numbers so that it's not going all the way up to 32 since I did like over half the shows, or I guess exactly half the shows. So let's try with just the 16. We got 14 heavy object. Well, that'll be interesting. I don't know how far I'll make it in this one. I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but we'll see how it goes. So I watched like 3 episodes of Heavy Object. I had already seen the first 2, so I watched 3, 4, and 5. And it's not terrible, but I just don't care enough to continue. The premise of this show only really becomes apparent in episodes like 3 and 4, which is that the main character, it takes place in a world where like all of warfare has boiled down to these giant metal balls called objects that fight each other. And they're supposed to be only like fought by other objects because it's kind of like a mutually assured destruction type scenario where like you have to have one in order to fight one, and everyone has one, so war is just object fighting. But then the main characters manage to defeat an object on foot, and so their military decides that you guys can do that all the time now and start sending them on missions. And it's like an arc structure where each arc they have to go defeat a giant robot thing, which I don't know if there's more intrigue that comes later in the show. But the thing is that the first arc doesn't, like, you don't quite understand that that's what the show's gonna be yet, because it's like, it's all about them beating that first one, and then from then on it's like, now you can do it all the time. And that first arc is presented more in like a sort of serious, sort of dramatic light. Then you get to arc 2, and like the entire time the characters is nonstop witty banter. It's nonstop like back and forth jabs and like little comedic lines while they're trying to fight these giant robot things. And like basically the appeal of the show is meant to be like the tactics, the way that like what kind of way these characters can come up with for fighting these giant robots. What is going to be their big solution? What are they going to pull out of their ass? While the writing is just very typical light novel type writing. Like it's not terrible. Like the dialogue has like some wit to it, but all the characters have the same personality, which is spew witty dialogue. Basically, as if you listen to the Procrastinators podcast, they just did an episode on witty dialogue, and this show totally falls into the traps that they talked about, which is not surprising because this is from the author of A Certain Magical Index, which I do like. But what's good about Index is that it's just got tons and tons of crazy ideas, and just every episode some weird new thing is happening that's like baffling. And like I've been reading the first book of the light novels, and it definitely suffers this problem of everyone's just a witty character. Everyone's constantly doing one-liners and stuff, and it just feels really weak and lame. All the characters are lame, but like what they're doing can be fun. In Heavy Object, it's a lot more oriented towards like something specific. It's like, here's the object, here's what its powers are, how do we beat it, And the presentation is just not good enough to make that interesting. Like, the animation is fucking garbage. This show looks like shit. It has terrible CG effects. I would say the only thing that looks good about it is the color palette, which is all blues, essentially. It's got this very, very cooling blue look to it in the episodes I watched. But, like, man, it's not pretty. And it also is presented in such a way where they just obviously didn't think that hard about a lot of the images, where there's too many scenes where like characters are sitting in the middle of bullet spray, and they're like, how are they not getting hit? Just because in a novel you wouldn't have to think about it, but when it's on screen you do, and they just didn't put enough thought into where they would put the characters. Or like there's one scene where like the main characters are breaking into a facility, and like they sneak in through this door, and then they just leave the door open. And I'm like, all it would take is someone having enough thought to say, and then we show them closing the door, because that would make sense. Somebody getting shot out there, but they don't. And there's just so many moments like that. Like every couple of minutes, there's some little thing that kind of irks me, and none of that would be that big of a deal, except that it just makes it not tense or exciting. The whole and the fact that the characters are constantly spouting witty banter back and forth doesn't help. So it's like, it's kind of not cool enough. Like if I wanted to watch a show about 2 guys taking down giant robots, I want it to be like cool and exciting and action-packed and maybe decently animated, but it's just so ugly and uncool that it's like, eh. And the tactics aren't that interesting. They're not like, nothing is mind-blowing in this. It's usually more of an ass pull. It's usually something that you couldn't have possibly known because it's like the main character notices that, oh, the mech has a rotor on it that's got a net stuck on it. So if I use that net to disrupt it, then I can beat it. Like there's no way you as a reader would have put that together, or, it wasn't like signposted. So yeah, I mean, it's not bad. I think it's entertaining enough to be like watchable, but for 24, 26 episodes, I just don't care enough to go through with that.
All right, well, we gave that one a shot. Let's see what we get for the next one. 12? That's Bakuon. Alrighty, let's check that out.
Up next is Bakuon, which I was extremely charmed and entertained by. This show totally held up. I loved the first episode back on the Weebcast. I loved every episode just as much as that. Very charming characters, and just the attitude that this show has towards its subject matter, because the show is about cute girls on motorcycles. It's like they start a club for motorcycles in high school. It's totally ridiculous, and it knows it. But the attitude that the show has towards motorcycles is fucking hilarious. Because very clearly the guy who wrote this manga has been a part of online communities, or even just in-person communities. Like, any community about a hobby, you guys all know. You're a part of the anime community. Everyone is very opinionated and very elitist about their opinions, and they argue all the time. And they're not cool, and they're lame. And that's how this show presents its characters. It presents them like real hobbyists, as just a bunch of argumentative, idiotic fanboys who admit to this. Like the main girl, not the main girl, but the girl who started the club, Onsa, she gives all these speeches about, like, the passion of motorcycling, and she's like, to ride a motorcycle, you have to be an idiot. Because, like, it's just a stupid thing that nobody should do. There's no logic behind riding it. It's all emotional. So, like, you have to really be an idiot. And, like, she's a total elitist prick about motorcycles, and she's constantly arguing with this other girl who's obsessed with Suzuki, and like the show just constantly shits on Suzuki motorcycles, but this girl is in love with them, and it's like she is the comic center of victimization in the show, not only because of the fact that she's like stubborn and prideful, as are many characters of this type in these shows, but that specifically she's into Suzuki and no one can take it seriously. And just that angle is so great to me, not only as like a member of anime communities, but like I have friends who are big into cars, and like I don't know what it is about cars in particular. I guess because with cars there's more of a clear distinction between what people would consider objectively good parts, like this engine has more horsepower and that is just better, versus people who, wouldn't make that distinction and have different emotional reasons for feeling the way they do about cars. And like, people argue incessantly about these things to an extent that's even greater than it would be in like the arts. So like, yeah, it's really interesting to see that presented in these characters so perfectly. Like, it totally is exactly like listening to people I know argue about cars. The characters make fun of each other in the same ways and just get so like uppity about their motorcycles. But the other angle of this is that it's also sort of a send-up of K-On! And I think this show, like, a lot of people, when a show like K-On! Comes out and it's very popular, a lot of people will then attribute every other, like, cute girls show to being, like, a copycat of K-On!, And I get why people think this, and because, when something's successful, there's going to be imitators, and that's definitely true, and I do think that K-On! Inspired a lot of imitators. But, like, there's a difference between that sort of nebulous idea of K-On! Made cute shows and therefore there's a lot of them, and this show, which I think is deliberately making reference to K-On! Specifically. And, like, for one thing, the show's called Bakuon, which doesn't, like, make any sense, because K-On! On is short for ongaku, which is music. So K-On! Is light music, and they were the K-On! Boo, the K-On! Club. I don't know what the on in Bakuon stands for. It's just like it really seems like it's a reference to K-On! In the title. It's got the main character girl who's basically exactly like Yui. She's just a total airhead who kind of just gets suckered into joining this club because of being vaguely interested for totally emotional reasons, throws down on a motorcycle and starts riding with this club. And she has a little sister who's like the way more mature one who's constantly taking care of her, which is basically the same thing as Ui. And like just this character is clearly based on Yui. But the attitude of the show is totally different from K-On!, where this show does have its like emotional character moments, but it's very like farcical about them in the way that like K-On! is pretty direct. Like K-On!, I wouldn't really think of it as a comedy show per se, because even though a lot of it's funny and there's a lot of jokes in it, I think the main focus of K-On! is to just put the girls in realistic scenarios and like present their life as is and have the comedy come out of that. Whereas Bakuon is a totally like absurdist, weird comedy show where like Jesus Christ shows up in this show several times. In reference to the fact, originally it's in reference because the characters are going to Aomori Prefecture, where, according to a certain Japanese sect of Christianity, Jesus went there one time on his pilgrimage. So they run into Jesus, who gives them a shortcut to Aomori, and like he gives the main girl like the Holy Grail. Like that's the kind of shit that happens in this show. It's way over the top and way comedy focused, and just a lot more like mean-spirited, in its presentation. Maybe not mean-spirited, but more honest, where like K-On! Is 5 cute girls who get into music, but they don't necessarily act like musicians. Sometimes they do. And I guess Azusa, who takes music a lot more seriously, has more of that attitude, but her arc is sort of about falling out of that and like getting in with these people who don't take it as seriously. And this show has an Azusa, which is a girl who is a motorbike racer who doesn't believe that motorcycles should be used on the roads. And so, like, they have to sort of, make her join the group and come over to their side and learn to appreciate riding a motorcycle non-seriously. And so, like, it's basically copying all the story beats from K-On!, but doing it in a totally different way, where this show is making it all comedy because of the fact that it's about motorcycles. And the writer clearly thinks of motorcycles as something stupid to be into. Whereas, like music is kind of a legitimate thing that can become a career and like an art form and an expression, and it has all these deeper, more emotional things. People just ride motorcycles because they're cool, and it's really stupid. And so like the emotional crux of the series, like the last episode has this big thing. I don't want to spoil exactly what happens, but like basically the big realization is that if we lived in a world where everyone was smart, there would be no motorcycles. But what makes motorcycles beautiful is that they're a symbol of our stupidity and our romantic attachment to dumb things. So yeah, the show definitely is taking K-On! And deliberately like poking fun at the way it does its setup and turning it into a more comedy driven experience. And I really think it all lands, and I think it can be surprising at how well it actually can do its almost fake emotional character moments, because I think everything in the show still rings true to human experience, and it has a certain worldliness about it where there's a lot of like almost dark humor in the show. There's a lot of like social commentary-esque humor about like the way people act and psychology in general, and a lot of very adult humor in scenes like where the main character girl has her training motorcycle can talk to her, which she names it Baita, just like Gita from K-On!, and Baita? I think it was Baita. Yeah, she names it Baita, I believe, just like Gita. And like, but it can literally speak to her. It's a talking motorcycle. And like, it constantly is talking about how it's getting ridden by men all the time. And like, just her whole thing is that she has this like, take on life that she's essentially a prostitute that is also a motorcycle. And then at one point is revealed to actually be a trans woman because they had, taken out like part of the engine that would give her more horsepower, and therefore she identifies as female, where she was born a male. So like, yeah, there's a lot of like interesting little worldly tidbits that make this show feel really smart, and I think that is really awesome, and I greatly appreciated it. All around great time. After Sakamoto, I would say it's probably my second favorite show of the year so far that I've completed. Just barely edging out Konosuba. This has been a great year for comedies. It hasn't, so far, from what I've seen, hasn't really been exceptional at anything else, but I still have a lot of shows to catch up on, so maybe we'll get something else that's really exceptional from a non-comedic genre.
Alrighty, let's see what we're gonna get next. We've come a long way with this list. 12 again? I think I just had 12 before. Concrete Revolutio. Well, that's gonna be 2 whole seasons between last year and this year, but I guess we're gonna do that. Alright, well, I watched the first 2 episodes of Concrete Revolutio, and I enjoyed it. I definitely would like to watch the rest, but I realized I'm not really in the mood to watch something that intensive for 24 whole episodes. And then I also thought, I'm really just not in the mood to watch a 26-episode show right now. I'd rather knock out as many of the small ones as possible, and then I can worry about savoring the nice big ones and not trying to just blow through them in a day. So I've broken my list up into the longer shows and the shorter shows, and I'm just going to roll for the short ones until I can finish all of them. Some of these are super short, so I should be able to do this inside of a week. Let's go ahead and generate. 6, that's Tabi Machi Late Show. That'll take me less than an hour, so let's do that.
Alrighty, Tabi Machi Late Show. This was probably not worth watching, but I wanted to because it's only 4 episodes, they're only 8 minutes long, and I had really enjoyed the first one, and I talked about it back on the Weebcast when it came out, but the first episode of Tabi Machi Late Show was just this quaint little story about this guy who is like an apprentice chef, and he's always admired this woman that he's been learning from, and it's kind of a commentary on the way that she finds it weird to be admired by someone when she herself doesn't consider herself to be a master, and there's someone else who she had admired in the past. And she kind of gets to talk to them at the end and be like, man, it's really weird to have someone looking up to you. And I was like, yeah, like I feel that way all the time when people like tell me how much they look up to me and stuff like that. So the fact that it was that subject matter and about food made it really entertaining for me. The other 3 parts were not relevant to my interests in the same way, because each episode of this is just a short story about a departure. It's always about someone who's about to leave in one way or another. So that first episode was the student was going off to go train somewhere. Episode 2 is about 2 high school girls who wanted to become friends, but they were both too inauthentic about it, and then they ended up never speaking again. Episode 3 is about a ghost girl who comes back for a festival. I'm spoiling all these, by the way. And the last one's about a teacher who marries her assistant teacher or something like that. The last one was super boring. So anyway, I appreciated this show's aesthetic because it was barely animated. It had these like images that would just kind of fade into one another, and but it had this like very light palette, very washed out feel. It was very Iyashikei, a nice little quaint soundtrack of sort of dramatic music. Each story was just kind of a little drama, just a little, that's a little faint drama to send you on your way. But again, after the first one, they weren't really interesting enough to hold my interest. So like, I give this like a strong 5. Don't recommend it to anyone because no one's gonna enjoy it. Like, I think the only reason I liked the first one so much was that I had related to it. Not to say the others are bad, it's just not interesting. So I don't think anyone would care enough to actually go out of their way to watch this.
Alrighty, finally knocked that little guy out, so let's see what's coming up next. 9, High Foodie, High School Furito. Let's give that a shot.
My hair's doing like a pompadour or something. I don't know how to cure this. I don't know how to immediately cure this. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I just watched High School Fleet, and I had a really great time with it. I thought it was pretty fucking swell. It's about a bunch of cute girls on a boat doing naval warfare. It's a pretty ridiculous concept, but handled really well and with a surprising amount of verisimilitude for what it is. It's very much in the vein of a show like Strike Witches or Girls und Panzer. Probably somewhere in the middle of those two. More on the Girls und Panzer side because it's less ridiculous like Strike Witches. But has that same vibe of just like being a sort of fun adventure show with lots of action scenes in it while maintaining a very lighthearted tone and being adorable and having all these cute girls running around just being super cute. Very light on fan service and stuff like that, more just about adorableness than it is, like, it doesn't really ever sexualize the characters, whereas something like Strike Witches is very fan service driven. But it is a really fun time and very, very well directed, I think. Very solidly paced, very solidly written. It feels tight. I think it's a good show for marathons because it's paced kind of like an action movie in the way that the story beats happen. So if you watch it all at once, it makes sense that way. But it also is mostly episodic. So each episode, will have its own climax and resolution that makes sense, for that week. So I think it's a show that covers its bases really well in the format of a 12-episode series. Wraps everything up and has an actual ending and stuff like that. And is just overall very entertaining. A lot of people ask me, because I often rag on shows that a lot of people enjoy because they can turn their brain off or, just have fun with. And for me, the way I am able to do that, the way I am able to not think about things while watching a show and just to lay back and be entertained without having to have a deep, thoughtful plot or like amazing characters or like themes, to just enjoy something as it's happening, is for it to not have any huge like glaring issues. Kind of like when I was talking about Heavy Object, that show kind of has the same tone as this one. It's a fun action show. But with Heavy Object, all those little details I talked about that would take me out of it, of like, a character opening a door and not closing it even though they're going to get found if they don't close the door. Like all those little details that they didn't think about. All that stuff makes it so I can't turn my brain off. Whereas a show like High Fury, it has a very High School Fleet has a very like detail-oriented production where everything feels right and it all makes sense, and in spite of how bizarre the circumstances are. And even though the show has a lot of moments where luck plays a huge role in what goes on, the fact that I guess spoilers start here, that no one dies in this show, is like kind of miraculous given the context of what's happening, because there's, ships firing on each other constantly, and getting hit even sometimes. But the way it's presented doesn't make you think about that. It doesn't have a ship sitting there in a hail of gunfire in a way that doesn't make sense for an overly long amount of time. The way that something like Heavy Object did with its characters. Like, there's never the sensation that this shouldn't be happening, that whatever's happening should not be happening. I'd say the only one moment that made me feel that way was when they first introduce, there's this like the premise of the show, this is really getting into spoiler territory. If you're sold on the show already, if you like these shows about cute girls doing stuff on boats, if that sounds like a fun show for you, you might want to check this one out. If you generally don't like this kind of show, this won't do anything for you. If you don't like watching a bunch of cute girls doing stuff, then don't watch this show. If you don't like messages about friendship and camaraderie, then get out of here. But otherwise, or if you just don't care about spoilers, I'm going to start spoiling stuff now. So the basic conceit is that there's this virus that kind of takes over people's minds. And the scene where we're first introduced to it, there's this girl who goes berserk as a result of the virus, and she jumps overboard on the ship, and then she somehow goes flying back out of the water onto the ship. And that is the only thing in the show that was so ridiculous that I was like, what just happened? Like, everything else made sense. And like, I mean, the show is goofy sometimes, and it's over the top, and like stuff happens that would not be like feasible in our world. But that was the only moment where I felt like it was kind of unjustified that she was able to bounce back out of the water, and that's it. Just such a minor thing. But like, because of all that, I never got taken out of the experience watching this show. Every dramatic scene was tense and exciting, even though I was sure that no one was gonna die. Like, the way the visuals are paced, just the way that images flow into each other. There's a really hype soundtrack, great music, great orchestral score for this show. Makes every battle feel epic, and like, you know, even though the tactics aren't like particularly interesting that they're using, it's usually like, you know, there's just one quick solution they come up with while they're fighting another boat, and then they execute that. And there's not anything too impressive about it other than that it feels good to watch, because each individual image is so well made. Each facial expression of the character, each, you know, just piece of animation. When there's actually like fight scenes, they're very rare, but they're like incredibly well animated and satisfying to watch. When a missile gets launched, it's done with amazing smoke effects, and the sound effects, sound design all over the show is fantastic. So it's just so well presented, and it never takes me out of it, that I could legitimately just watch this and enjoy the entire thing as just an entertainment spectacle without ever having to think about anything. You know, like, there was nothing that would take me out of it. There was no themes that were like, oh wow, this is exploring the idea of what it means to be this. You know, like, it's the themes are basically shit you've seen 1,000 times before if you've watched any shows like this. It's just really well done, and that's all I really ask for sometimes, you know. So I had a great time with it, and the character designs are cute. The aesthetic of the show is good. You know, I would say the water, like the CGI water effects are mediocre, but they're not bad. They're definitely better than Heavy Object. Everything about this show is better than Heavy Object. Like, I feel like this is what I, like, when I was watching Heavy Object, I was wishing it was like this. You know, this is a show that actually accomplished what that show seemed to be setting out to do. You know, the characters all feel very distinct, and there's a lot of characters, but, you know, at first they're a little hard to keep track of, but the show doesn't try to bog you down and introduce you to all of them, which is a mistake that a show like Kencol made, where that show like had 30 fucking characters, and it's like, and here's this person. I'm like, I'm not gonna remember that. You know, this show just kind of organically lets you learn who the characters are, and then by the end of the series, it is willing to do a lot more with its supporting cast because of the fact that you've figured out who they all are. You've kind of learned about them, and then, you know, in the last couple of episodes, then some of those incredibly minor characters get big moments in the end, which are only possible because of how they were handled throughout the show, and how everyone was so distinct from one another and had their own role to play, both on the ship and in terms of personality. So it's just all around tight writing and directing and solid presentation. And I also want to talk about this. This again is spoiler territory. The reason I keep giving spoiler warnings is mostly about this aspect that I'm going to talk about, which is that I think this show doesn't quite do a bait and switch, but I think it uses the fact that there's so many bait and switch shows out there now as a way to make itself more dramatic in the early episodes. Because, you know, in the last 5 years, you know, we had Madoka Magica come out in 2011 and, you know, pretended to be this cute girls moe show in its advertising, and then you watch the show and it's this kind of weird, dark, magical girl show, and then all of a sudden it gets really fucking gruesome, you know? And so it was kind of a bait and switch thing. And then if you watch, like, last year's Gakko Gurashi, where they had the whole first episode was pretending to be this high school comedy, and then it turns out, oh, actually it's a zombie apocalypse, you know? And, like, so that bait and switch technique has become a big thing that shows use for hype. This show, I think, is a reversal on that, where it's looking at those shows and it pretends to be one. Because when they were announcing this show, like when it was coming out, it was titled High Foodie, like an abbreviation of High School Fleet, High Foodie, which sounds more adorable and cutesy. And they had like a picture of like two high school girls in uniforms, you know, like just whatever. And then once the first episode aired, the way the first episode ends is that the main characters are all trainees. They're all on this ship. They're all like new cadets to try to become, seafaring women, and they get attacked by their teacher's ship, and they have to sink it. And so it's not really presented as dark, but it leads to a question of, oh, is this show going to be darker than it looks? And then right after that episode aired, they changed the imagery of the advertising and called it High School Fleet and had a picture of girls on a boat. And those early episodes, you really don't know if this is going to take a dark turn, because the reason the things are happening are a total mystery. You don't know why these girls are being considered, like, they're being considered mutineers by the other ships in the area. They're under attack, and no one's able to communicate with them. So it feels like this could take a dark turn at any minute. And it's not until about halfway through the show that most of those anxieties are relieved, and you realize that it's not going to take a dark turn, and they start to learn what's going on, and then it becomes more of a straightforward adventure series, like trying to, just save everyone who's in danger. So I really think that they used that. Like, I don't think it's that the show was written around that. I don't think it was written to be like a fake bait and switch show. But I think that they looked at the fact that they could do that and play it up as like a way to make the viewer feel tense in those early episodes, where we have this mystery. And what's interesting is not so much knowing whether or not like why they're being attacked. Like, that part of the mystery is less interesting than the mystery of, is this show going to be dark or not? I think that's the mystery that kept me on the edge of my seat for the early episodes. And then, of course, by the time it reveals that it's not, I'm already hooked by the characters and the writing and the presentation and, all the things that make the show exciting. And so, like, that tension being relieved doesn't take away from the rest of the show. I don't know if this effect would be felt by everyone, especially if you don't know about that marketing change, which when it happened was confusing, because I was like, this show doesn't seem like it's going to get dark, but who knows, there's so many bait and switch shows out now. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting little tidbit, but overall, really solid show, enjoyed it a lot. And I think that's the end of this video. I'm not going to end it as awkwardly as the last one where I wasn't sure what show I was cutting off on. I'm cutting off on this show. I'll see you in I think we only need like 2 more of these. Like, I've got 8 more short shows and like 5 or 6 longer shows that I want to do. And that'll be all the 2016 shows. I can't even imagine the prospect of being caught up on a whole fucking first half of the year. It's beautiful. I have more 2015 shows that I have to catch up on. That's going to be the real nightmare when I have to do that. Anyway, that's it. Peace out.